welcome to our fourth class on Jesus and his parables. Today we will look at the parable of the rich fool, a parable that speaks to universal questions about wealth and inheritance. Throughout history, the question of how to divide an inheritance is a sensitive one that can create countless problems and can damage family relationships, sometimes for generations. Today's parable is set in the context of a question about how to divide an inheritance with a brother. Jesus uses this opportunity to teach a hard truth about material goods and relationships. Let's turn to the text. I'd encourage you to download the handout of the text found on the class website and follow along. As we look at the structure of the parable, we see it is told in the context of a conversation Jesus has with an anonymous man. Two wisdom sayings that hint at the answer to the man's question bracket the parable itself. The parable is a story of a landowner who is trying to ensure his future and enjoy the good life while it lasts. In attempting to achieve his goals, the landowner forgets to consult with God and what God's plans are for him. The landowner spends his life accumulating goods only to have them all taken from him when he dies. What he thought were his possessions were really loans from God, including his own life. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes makes this point quite clear. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. Let's look a little more closely and flesh out some interesting details. The anonymous person who speaks to Jesus already knows what he wants. He wants his part of the inheritance, but he tries to use Jesus to get what he wants. Notice, the man doesn't ask Jesus for his opinion or for his advice, but he tells Jesus to do something. The man wants Jesus, with the authority as a rabbi, to pressure his brother to divide the inheritance the way he wants. In Roman law, both brothers would have been required to agree on how to divide an inheritance. In contrast, Jewish rabbis taught that if one brother wanted the inheritance divided a certain way, the second brother should just agree. The rabbis were consulted only if the brothers struggled to decide. The man is essentially saying to Jesus, "You're a rabbi, and we all know what the rabbis teach. I'm right and my brother's wrong, and you need to tell him that." The man had already decided what his rights were, and he wanted Jesus to enforce them. So we aren't surprised when Jesus sounds a little curt. He refuses to act as a judge because Jesus recognizes that the man's real problem isn't dividing the inheritance, but is the broken relationship with his brother. Even if the man gets the inheritance he wants, the underlying problem of their damaged relationship isn't solved, and the fight over the inheritance could be the last straw. What the man and his brother must learn is that there is more to life than material goods. There are greater things to gain than an inheritance and much bigger things to lose than an inheritance. Jesus warns the man that his greed is making him blind to the most important things in life. Now we turn to the parable itself. The parable begins with a rich landowner whose land produced abundant crops. We aren't sure if he's rich because of his farm or if he's rich through other business ventures, but we know the landowner has more than enough to live a comfortable life. Unfortunately, it appears the landowner believes he owns the land and what it produces, rather than recognizing he is simply a steward of the land and the crops it yields. The rich man finds himself with more than enough, and now he's going to get another bumper crop. He doesn't need it, but what will he do with it? The rich landowner debates with himself what to do, and maybe he mulls the problem over for quite some time. Notice what the landowner doesn't do. He doesn't realize he's rich enough and doesn't need more. He doesn't thank God for all the material blessings he already has. He doesn't ponder how the extras could help someone less fortunate. He simply refers to the crop as mine and seems to be concerned only with how to benefit himself. Interestingly, when the early church father, Ambrose of Milan, taught this parable, Ambrose pointed out that there was quite enough storage available in the mouths of the poor and the needy. Now, I know our Puritan work ethic may be kicking in right now. As Paul teaches in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we must answer the call to work so we aren't a burden on others. Even while we were with you, we gave you this command: those unwilling to work will not get to eat. Yet we hear that some of you are living idle lives, refusing to work and meddling in other people's business. We command such people and urge them in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down and work to earn their own living. Now we must balance this teaching from Paul with another passage from the same Paul who wrote in Ephesians chapter 4 that work is also supposed to put us in a position to care for the needs of others. Instead, use your hands for good hard work and then give generously to others in need. You see, this is a both-and situation. Work is given to us so that we can care for ourselves and our families and aren't a burden on others. And because we are indeed our brother's keeper, work is meant to help others who are in need. The rich landowner comes up with a solution. He'll build bigger barns. At this time in the Middle East, tithes and offerings were set aside in barns, and the priests and the Levites collected them to distribute to the larger community. However, these aren't the barns the rich landowner is planning to build. He wants the barns to hold the crops to assure he is provided for abundantly. Now notice, the landowner is alone when he makes this decision and by himself when he plans to enjoy his bumper crop, a party of one who will eat, drink, and be merry. By himself. This committee of one doesn't seem that unusual to us in the West, but in the Middle East, people live in very tight-knit communities where the leading men of the village hang out and spend years talking to each other. The smallest decision is discussed for hours on end. But the landowner has no one to talk with. Is it because he trusts no one in his community? Has his wealth become a personal prison that locks others out and leaves him inside, alone? The rich landowner's speech is quite tragic. He has no one to tell of his good fortune. No family, no friends, no village elders, no fellow landowners. In the parables of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the prodigal son, the woman, the shepherd, and the father have others they can share their good news with, others to celebrate with. The rich landowner has no one. His world is limited to his solitary life. He doesn't realize life is more than material goods. Life needs relationships. God breaks into the landowner's life and says, "You fool! This night your soul is required of you." The Greek word translated as required is one that is used to designate the repayment of a loan. The rich landowner's life is actually a loan from God, and now God wants his loan returned to him. We saw earlier in the parable that the landowner thought he owned the land and the crops it produced when he spoke of my crops, my barns, my grain, my goods. But in fact, he was simply a manager of the land God loaned him. Just like the land was a loan from God, the landowner's life was also a loan from God. The parable assumes a time lapse between the fourth and fifth stanzas, and possibly the rich landowner died soon after building the new barns that were supposed to assure a comfortable future. The barns offered him no lasting security. Now God asks the question that really stings. Whose will these things be? God is nailing the real problem the rich landowner has. The problem isn't his death, but the true poverty at the center of his life. He's lonely and friendless in the middle of material riches. The landowner debated with himself alone, pampered himself alone, and quite likely died alone. If he has a family, he doesn't know who will win the power struggle for the inheritance following his death. He was rich in material goods, but poor in the relationships that matter and that make life rich and worthwhile. Jesus leaves the parable open-ended, and it doesn't tell us how the rich landowner responded. Did he mourn the fact that he cared more for a big bank account than the community of friends and family around him? Did he realize wealth doesn't bring security or joy? Did he grieve the fact that he didn't use his wealth to help those around him? The rich landowner's silence forces us to grapple with these same questions. Which do I value more, riches or relationships? The parable ends with a second wisdom saying, people who use their energy to enrich only themselves are misdirected. Too often an excess of riches, whether fame or fortune, power or pleasure, end up destroying the people who pursue them. Jesus teaches that possessions aren't simply ours because of our hard work and effort, but they are a loan from a gracious God. And possessions aren't the only thing God loans us. Our very lives belong to Him. We are to use these gifts, these loans from God, to serve others. Jesus underscores that the rich landowner was already isolated when he had to deal with another bumper crop of grain, and focuses on what he decides to do with the surplus. Jesus is making a very important point. The desire for more wealth, more material goods, more power, position, prestige can become insatiable. But a truly abundant life can never be achieved with more and more stuff. It can only be realized through being rich towards God and others, storing up treasures that last, like faith, hope, and love. I'd love to know how the original speaker reacted to this parable and to see the look on his face when he recognized the truth Jesus spoke. Jesus explained that the problem wasn't how to divide an inheritance with his brother. The problem was their broken relationship. Jesus challenged the man by not giving him an immediate solution to a dispute over money. Jesus wanted him to gain a new perspective on what is truly important in life. People are so much more important and valuable than possessions. To summarize this parable, in the face of a broken relationship, Jesus refused to worsen the relationship by taking sides in a dispute over money. Both material possessions and our lives are gifts from God. The landowner was mistaken when he believed he owned anything, including his life. The rich landowner's wealth destroyed his ability to maintain enduring human relationships. A person who thinks security and the good life are found in material things is a fool. The abundant life is found in being rich towards God and others. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we will look at the parable of the great banquet. So please read Luke chapter 14, verses 15 to 24 to prepare. Until then, keep the faith.